Hello and welcome, everybody. Nice to see you all. This is our second in our four-part series of the Erotic as Power, a walk through the law. And, I tend to like to drink from the fire hose, but I have really tried in this series to not feed all of you from the fire hose. So I'm definitely going to try to restrain myself a little in all the things that I want to talk to while still giving you something meaty and interesting to think about. Okay, I'm going to start with some of my caveats, which I've been giving on these talks, and I'm going to have a few more on this one. So first is a couple of trigger warnings. So we are going to be talking about sexual violence, sexual content, sex trafficking laws, prostitution, racism, oppression. And, I first of all want to make sure that you feel like you're in the right room for this conversation. And two, just to be aware that a lot of strong feelings can come up around these topics. And if anything comes up for you, there are many resources out there of organizations and people that can help if you have feelings around these topics. And you can also reach out to me or someone at the Eros platform as well. The second thing I want to say is that everything that I'm about to tell you is my views only and my views alone. Some of them I have workshopped with other folks, and we've spent a lot of time working on it together. But these are my views, and I am an attorney, and I have several clients, including which is the Eros platform, which I'm delivering this talk on. But anything I say in these talks should be just attributed to me and not to any other organization. I'm speaking live, I'm speaking somewhat off the cuff. I don't exactly know what I'm going to say. And so anything that I say is solely attributable to me and not to anybody else. Okay, so let's get into it. So today we're really going to focus on sex as one expression of the erotic. And what's interesting here is sex is what the law in particular tends to reduce all of the erotic to. And so this one slice of this very rich and complex field gets focused on and, in my view, pathologized. And then that informs all the legal decisions, very important legal decisions that affect our institutions, people's life and liberty, the balance of power between freedom and the coercive powers of the state. And only the sex part gets focused on. And so I want to make sure that as we go through this talk, you remember that there's a whole display of the erotic, and sex is just one portion of it. But because the law and our culture promotes it to such great importance, this is what I'm going to focus my talk on. But it's going to be important to remember that there's more than just that. So the first thing I'm going to say is that we live in a sexually anorexic society where we dismiss the power of sexuality as a source of power and as a source of fulfillment and nourishment in our lives. And we went into this a little bit in the last talk, where we talked about Audre Lorde's views on this, where that was her view too, which is one that I wish would get more uptake in the academic realm, that only by having a good relationship with your erotic are you truly expressed. Can there be true fellowship, true companionship? And only by that way will you demand the most of yourself in every realm of your life, and the most care and quality for yourself and the people around you, and not accept anything less than the best. And so while the erotic is often seen as, something that's kind of nice to have to get your jollies on, it's actually essential to our lives, but it doesn't get treated that way. And part of what I'm looking at is why is that the case? And one of the consequences of seeing the erotic in that way is that sexuality itself gets treated as a pathology, and people who are highly sexual get treated as pathological at best, or kind of weird and pathological at worst, and kind of weird and odd and dismissible at best. And how are we going to change that so that sexuality and people who are perhaps like endowed and blessed with more sexual desire, more sexual appetite, can operate and exist in the world that doesn't respect that and tends to try and control and legislate it in very unhealthy ways. And one of the models that I think that people who identify as sexual, let's put it that way, could adopt is from the LGBTQI community, where one of the huge breakthroughs between homosexuality being seen as something pathological, something outlawed by law, something immoral, outrageous, unnatural, when the LGBT community, probably pre the Qs and the Is and the pluses, got one of their key messaging points, which they kept hammering into the mainstream until it was broadly accepted, was, look, being gay, whether you hate it or love it or like it or are indifferent to it, it's not something you can change. And until that time, all of the efforts in the mainstream around dealing with its relationship to sexuality was, well, let's try and change these people, because if we can get rid of this pathology, then we can go back to being, what we consider a normal, mainstream, heterosexual, Christian, or, whatever religion society. And when, the sort of benchmark that was used is, well, 1 in 10 people are gay. That's just a fact of life. And those numbers in the book After the Ball, they said those numbers were anybody's guess. Nobody really knew or had a good study on exactly how many people were gay, but that was a decent benchmark to say, what kind of 1 in 10 people are gay? And it's a condition. It's not an ailment. And once it got accepted as a condition of life, then whatever your feelings of personal revulsion or fear or loathing were about it, you could begin to deal with it, because it's a fact of life that 1 in 10 people I'm going to come across are gay. And from that point, the media started to change and have greater representation of gay people, usually poking fun of them or as a kind of object of ridicule, but they became sort of accepted that you would see someone gay in a movie or a series or something. And from there into the law and into all other domains. And, lawmakers and all of that, so that representation of gay people became something that you saw and expected to see. And I think the same is true for sexuality. In a certain way, everybody's sexual, but there are variations and degrees to people who might be more sort of just blessed or cursed, whatever you want to call it, with sexual appetite. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the way that when we are in this kind of anorexic state in our culture of vilifying sexuality, of not accepting it as something worthy of exploration, of something that needs to be treated with such suspicion, we actually end up impairing our own ability to properly engage with it. And here's one reason why. There are many, many reasons. So Wilhelm Reich, who was one of the early psychoanalysts, he was a contemporary of Freud and Carl Jung. And he was kind of, Jung was radical, but Reich was really radical, to the point that he got, kicked out of the society and had to more or less flee to America and was kind of hounded for the rest of his life. And he was quite the firebrand. But I think some of his theories and thinking hold up, all these years later, because he was one of those that was really willing to look at sexuality and politics and society and really focus on that. And so he has this theory of segmental armoring. And the basic idea of it is that you have all these suppressed emotional feelings and desires, which the state, because it doesn't want you to have, it wants a compliant and docile population, encourages at every turn, not to mention our own kind of restrictive feelings about it. And you end up through this way of basically restricting blood flow to the body. And then you get less oxygen to the brain, and then you get less information and intuition about sexuality and how it operates and the signals that are coming forward and backward and the dynamics at play. And so you get this increasing disconnection between the brain and body, where sexuality is more and more outside of ourselves, and it looks scarier and scarier and more in need of the exact kind of tight controls that are, making it manifest in unhealthy ways in the first place. So this kind of feedback loop is something that I think we have the opportunity to start loosening and lessening the restrictions on. Because, and why? Because what for? Why are we doing this? And what is it about? And it's because sex is the great leveler. Sex returns us to our animal nature, and in a way that's unmatched by anything else that we can do. And it's the closest that we can get to total freedom and raw power. And it gives us conscious contact with power. Now, usually in our society, that kind of access to power is mediated by a third party. And then there's lots and lots of fighting about who gets to fill that slot. So that is, spiritual leaders, religious leaders, they are the ones who are granted access to these forms of power, and they determine what the rules are for who gets to have access to that. But sexuality breaks through that. And so sexuality is kind of a shortcut to free thinking and independence. And it's one of the reasons that consciously or unconsciously, it gets so vilified and so restricted, because if everybody has their own independent source of power, that is terrifying. And sometimes, for totally understandable reasons. If you're an administrator and you're charged with making sure that things run smoothly, if everybody had their own army, if everybody had their own library, if everybody, that's quite an intimidating prospect. And, you know, you may think of yourself as a very good person, as a very well-meaning person, but still confronted by raw power. The emotional response could have you shut things down in a way that are actually inimical to your own better judgment and values. And I will say that as a lawyer, I have experienced this many times in my life, where if I'm confronted by an idea that I find difficult, I will tend to make up very smart, very logical sounding, very well reasoned, with lots of evidence behind them, reasons why it's a no. It's a big, fat, hairy no. And so I do have a lot of compassion for this. But you know, it's something that is beginning to have very dramatic, well, I think it always has, but it has new iterations that are quite dangerous for the kind of society that I would prefer to live in. So, and then, you know, what is the support for this notion that sex gives you access to unmediated raw power? Well, there's quite a lot of study done on this, and this is despite the fact that almost all study on sexuality, and I did a poll of multiple scientists who have done a lot of work in the field of sexuality looking for these kind of studies. And the thing I was universally told is that the money and the resources for the study on sexuality goes into how harmful it is, how dangerous it is, how pathological it is. But despite that, the little sliver of what is the actual use and benefit of sex that has managed to slip into the scientific mainstream, you know, is quite interesting to look at. So I'm just going to give you a few studies here. There's one from Higgins in 2008, which says that the frequency of sex is positively correlated with higher earnings, better health, charisma, and magnetism. There's a Greek study by Driadis from 2013, funded by the EU, which shows that frequency of sex, reported frequency of sex, positively correlates with earnings. There's one by Tu and others showing from 2020, showing charisma is positively correlated with greater reported sexual desire and satisfaction. So if you report higher than average sexual desire and satisfaction, you'll also report higher than average charisma. There are another 4 or 5, but I'll just give you 2 more. There's a study by Kepler in 2018 that showed that your risk of dying of heart attack was 28% less where you reported having sex more than once a week. So benefits for health. There's one from Levitt in 2017. Those that reported sex the prior day reported improved positive affect, meaning how they felt about themselves, job satisfaction, and engagement. So, you know, this is not just a nice idea. The science does bear this out. Okay, so now the next thing I want to move on to, because, and I'll probably spend some of this talk on it and some of the next talk on it, because it's such an important topic. I think it's the topic, which is women and power. Because the legislation and lawmaking that we're seeing is all driven by ideas about women and power that I don't think hold up. And so we're going to explore that for a bit. And so some of the areas that we mentioned in the last talk where there is a lot of legislation is pornography. And you get, you know, views of academics like Professor Catherine McKinnon, which considers pornography to be simply a form of evidence of rape, It's the physical evidence of rape, because sex itself is rape in our patriarchal culture. And so pornography is merely evidence of rape. And regardless of what the two people, who the photographer and the model and the audience, regardless of what they say about their relationship, that's how it's treated. And the other areas are sexual harassment in the workplace, prostitution, and sex trafficking. And in each of these areas, there are certain ideas about women in power that drive the legislative process, and that drive the way the law is interpreted. And so I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about women in power, and I'm going to give you some more facts and statistics. I hope I'm not going to overload you here, but there's a great book called The Richer Sex by Liza Mundy, who's a Washington Post journalist. And I don't know if all these statistics are for her, but some of them I definitely got from her. And I think we've been reaching a threshold in the last few years of the threshold actually tipping towards women being the primary drivers of and holders of power in our culture. I personally think that's where it should be, and is going to be better and happier for everyone. We can argue about that. I don't think that means that, you know, men lose power. In fact, I think they get more power. They get animated by a power source that can bring out their brilliance in more productive ways. So here are a couple of statistics. 40% of married working women now out-earn their spouses. 41% of mothers are the primary or the sole breadwinner for their families. In 2017, it was the first time in history that there were more women with college degrees than men. 57% of the college population is now women versus 38% in 1958, which I think was the year that Betty Friedman's famous book that kicked off the feminist movement, The Feminine Mystique, was published. And so things have really changed. And I think this is one of the reasons that we're seeing what we're seeing in our culture with the rise of the Me Too movement, which I think had an important role, but I think only half of Me Too was done. There was the part of Me Too. I had an experience around sexuality that was not good. It was not ideal. It was maybe abusive. And the second half of that is, well, what do we do with that? And I think this is where the second half of Me Too has been, well, what we do with that is we assign blame, and we introduce stricter laws, and we drive sexual men from positions of power, and we kind of pathologize men, because that's where we're putting the locus of this desire for sexuality, for this, you know, as if we don't have any of that ourselves. So you get this rising power of women in our culture, and then you hit a decision point, and you hit a very difficult choice point. Because with taking the mantle of power, it necessarily implies a loss of innocence. It necessarily implies making mistakes. It necessarily implies harming others through the exercise of your power as the powerful party in the interaction. There's no way to avoid that. And so the tendency is to want to have it both ways, to grab the mantle of power, to say it's our time, we as women are here to take power, but then continue to use that power to institutionalize women as innocent victims of a male world. And this is where things get really, really screwy. And this is how you go from the Me Too movement and multiple women coming forward to talk about their abuse at the hands of Harvey Weinstein, who now has a long spell in prison, to Sheila Kelly, a advocate for women's power, a woman herself, but also someone with great sexual power and sexual magnetism and unashamed about her sexuality. I mean, a lot more sexual magnetism than the other one, getting attacked for the same reasons and by the same kind of programmatic approach of institutionalizing women as victims. And that's when, when I read that article, I knew we have crossed the threshold, as they say in the Leonard Cohen song. And it's a very dangerous thing because people are hardwired to protect the innocent, but we also have, a limited biological, sympathetic, and empathetic ability to reach out to someone in pain and help. We're biologically wired to save children and small animals. It's why they make their eyes so big, so that you won't kill them when you're grumpy. But when you misuse this quite scarce and quite needed resource, genuine victims of abuse, are kind of drowning in this sea of this approach that's actually killing free speech and killing free thought. And so that is, and then any sort of criticism of this kind of movement gets cast as victim blaming, but it's really not. I mean, I think it's the most victim friendly approach to take towards this. So we get into this very difficult situation where there is this, demand for protection of women at the hands of men. And there are multiple, situations where this has come out, and, hundreds of men and increasingly women are kind of losing their jobs, their careers, their ability to do their work as a result of an interaction where it was considered that, the woman was in a position that she lacked power in relation to this stronger male figure. So, and what you're getting is kind of women demanding paternalism in the same breath that they're demanding its abolition. And that puts you in a very difficult position, because then you get, and this is all very context specific, it's very fact specific, there's no general kind of approach to everything, but there's a general trend that we're seeing in this direction. Because the person or the group of people who are under attack then have to, what they're being told to do, if you're trying your best to be a good person and a good social actor and listen to what's being said, then what you're being told is, hey, look, this is your fault. And so you're under attack, but you're also expected to protect the person that is attacking you at the same time. And nothing could be a greater breeding ground for resentment. And this is kind of what we're seeing with sort of all these incelibate, resentful, involuntarily incelibate, resentful young men out there, very angry about the state of affairs with no real winning way to fix it other than to shut down their sexuality and say, I'm a bad person for ever having a sexual thought. And frankly, that seems to be what the kind of radical feminist version of this would seem to call for. I would love to have a conversation. Maybe there is one. Maybe someone can point me to one as to what young men in that position are meant to do and how they should respond in a healthy way. I'd love to know, but it doesn't seem to me that anything other than, castrate yourself and consider yourself to be a bad and shameful person has been presented. So I want to get into one last thing, and then I'll wrap up for this session, which is the dangers of sex. And, this is not to be dismissed. I'm going to give you a quote from Camille Paglia, like, sex is not necessarily without its risks, and it's not necessarily not dangerous. And so she says, and she was talking here about laws on campus that were introduced on campuses, which are called yes means yes laws, which means if you're accused of rape, you can only advance consent as an affirmative defense where you got a verbal yes to a request to have sex. So on the one hand, you could say, well, shouldn't that just be the norm? Like, if you want to have sex with someone, make sure that they actually said yes before you had, and you verbally got a yes from them. And her view was, well, sex is a physical interaction animated by primitive energies and instincts that cannot be reduced to verbal formulas. Neither party in any sexual encounter is totally operating in the rational realm, which was why the Greek god Dionysus was the patron of ecstasy, a hallucinatory state of pleasure or pain. Yes means yes laws are drearily puritanical and literalistic, as well as hopelessly totalitarian. And this is the thing that I keep coming back to, is that this, kind of need for a safe society, which I agree with, gets used towards totalitarian and authoritarian ends that leave nobody safer. And so, you get this demand for protection, which is understandable in a sexual context, but you have to look at, is it really demand for protection, or is it just discrimination against sex versus other fields of endeavor and areas where such risk is just considered commonplace and normal and totally acceptable? So, for example, and this comes to light in the debate around prostitution. There is a demand to make prostitution absolutely illegal in all circumstances. And one of the major rationales for that is that it opens the way for sexual violence against women, which is intolerable in any circumstances, and any measure needed to stop it is a justifiable one. But at the same time, it is totally tolerable to put people in dangerous positions every day, like soldiers, like correctional officers, people that do dangerous jobs, and that's considered acceptable because it doesn't involve sex. So, you get things like men make up 85% of the military, where you are expected to put yourself potentially in the way of being killed. Men are 10 times more likely than women to die on the job, but that is considered unremarkable. And so why should it be okay for men to voluntarily and with society's blessing put themselves in harm's way, whereas it's considered not permissible, even if the woman wants to, and regardless of her social circumstances, to put herself in some unavoidable danger by determining that she wants to engage in a sexual field, whether that's for money or otherwise. So the next time we're going to get into some more fun stuff, like there's a big shift underway from stocks of knowledge to flows of knowledge, where women are going to shine, and it's going to be hugely disruptive, but it's also going to be hugely wonderful. And women owning their power and women owning their sexual power is going to be the jumping off point and the access point to a great new world. And despite all the craziness that's happening around us, that is happening, and it's happening fast. And if you're on the Eros platform, you're at the forefront of making that happen. So let's continue the good work. And I'll let me see, what are we going to pitch this week? The Eros Monastery is at the Land, and it's a place where you can come for a weekend, a week, or a month, and really delve into the erotic in all of its many forms. And so that includes contemplation, meditation, food. I mean, if there was a pie of the erotic, probably 60% of it goes to food. And so that's something that's taken great care of. And the space of eating and the space of being together. I mean, all of these things can dramatically increase your access to power, your access to get the things that you want in life. So if you're interested, get a hold of Eli Block and come on over. It's a beautiful time of year with summer starting. So I will leave it there and open us up for questions.
If you have a question, raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. Okay, we'll go with Lisa.
Hi, Kevin. Thank you so much. I've been really enjoying this series, and this one in particular because of my love of nursing and medicine and research. I would definitely want to know more about those research studies, and I was curious when in those studies that you mentioned, was it like man-woman sex? Was it intercourse? Did it matter? Like when you're saying having sex before work or after work and those type of things, like what was the dynamic of that type of exchange that created the positive outflow?
Yeah, great question. I think almost all of the studies that were done were survey studies. And I think that none of them kind of distinguished between what kind of sex you were having. So you basically self-reported based on whatever kind of sex you were having. I don't recall from reading them. I did read as many of them as were, where the whole paper was, some of them were behind paywalls for scientific journals, but there were summaries. But I don't recall them specifically breaking down the difference between straight sex and gay sex and what qualified as sex. But I do believe it was partnered sex rather than, manual stimulation for all of the studies that I remember reading.
Okay, cool. I have access to journals for school. So if you ever want, if you ever want full access to something, you just let me know.
Yeah, within the rules of the copyright of the people. Yes, that's very helpful. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, Lisa. We'll go to Russell next.
Hi, Kevin. It occurs to me that there's another like structural shift about whether, I don't know if it's patriarchy, but if there's one person in charge and a bunch of other people just tell me what to do, that they're not forthright about what matters to them, that the conversation about an egalitarian relationship in sex is actually no different than the egalitarian relationship that underscores democracy, that you need to speak up and you need to listen to those that do speak. And I just feel like it has a twist. A twist I really like about it, so that it's kind of like the way you do one thing is the way you do everything, so that not having the phrase silence implies consent, that people are active about what matters to them, actually just serves the culture in a very wide perimeter, because once you get comfortable with not knowing how it's going to turn out, which is really what democracy is all about, and what authoritarian is like, let me tell you how it's going to be. It's like, no, we're not going to do that. I'm going to just see how this continues to blossom, and I'm not afraid of how that turns out. That there's a dynamic in what you're speaking to, and I'm just bringing something else, revealing something else about it.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really interesting, and you know, and this is one of the problems with the sort of anorexic authoritarian track that we're on, is that it actually cuts off the modalities and mechanisms that would give people the ability to exercise their voice in what is admittedly a very difficult domain. To say to someone, give them
sovereignty, give them autonomy,
go into a hotel room in the middle of the night after a few drinks, and then be able to speak your voice in the middle of some kind of interaction, it's not an easy thing to do. And just sort of saying, well, why didn't they say anything, is, you know, not necessarily that helpful. But although if you want to be treated like an adult and not like a child, that's a question that should be allowed to be asked, whereas more and more the law doesn't even permit the asking of that question. Is considered, even asking that question is going to put that person into a state of fragile brokenness from which they will never recover. But then this is where the attacks on One Taste and the likes of S Factor are so noxious to me, because these were environments, women created, women led, you know, democratic, opted in, opt out at any time you like, but offered as, here is some in the line of fire training around how to access your sexuality and how to access your sensuality. That's going to be difficult. Nobody said it wouldn't be difficult. And so the fact that these kind of approaches are shutting down those spaces where you would have this sort of ability for people to access their voice, because they'd have some time to practice and to do it with some training wheels and to do it with some friends around, is troubling to me. So thanks for that question. It's really helpful.
Yeah.
Thanks, Russell. Next, I'm going to read a comment and question that Rachel submitted. Really interesting and eloquent talk. Thank you. I loved what you said about women are demanding paternalism while calling for its abolition. How do you think we can turn the tide on that?
Well, I think it's going to be up to women, because they do have the power. So I can talk my little heart out over here, but it's really going to be up to the women having a conversation with each other You know, and this is where I think Nicole's book, the Age of Eros Manifesto, is really a helpful starting point for that conversation. And again, I think it goes back to dialogue. Like, you know, the way that apartheid ended was a dialogue between two sides that weren't that fond of each other, but they knew that to get to where they each wanted to go, they needed to start talking. And so I think dialogue among sisters, which is a difficult thing to do, as is dialogue amongst brothers, is going to be our path to freedom.
Thanks, Kevin. Does anyone have any final questions? I don't see any more hands up.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining on this continued adventure into the unknown. Certainly week to week, I don't know where we're going, but I'm glad I have you all with me on the journey. So thanks a lot for coming.